So today we'll be doing a workshop on UI UX design for hackathons. So this is essentially me sharing my experience from what I've learned as a designer and front-end engineer for 18 hackathons so far. And so it's mainly going to be just me sharing my personal experience, and hopefully you guys can take away something about how you can rapidly iterate and design for hackathons. And also I'm a little bit sick, so sorry if I become a little bit stuffy. But before I begin, this is a workshop hosted by Design at UCI. So if you guys don't know already, Design at UCI is a club for all things design, and we focus a lot on UI UX design as well as product design. So this year we focused a lot on front end engineering as well as web development. So if you guys are from UCI, this is a really good community to just build your design skill as well as meet a lot of other designers. We also have a national design-a-thon, which anyone can join. So it doesn't matter what school you're part of. It's kind of like a hackathon for design. So we just had one in May, and we're gonna have another one next year. If you guys are interested in design. But a little bit about me. So again, my name is Jasmine, and I've attended 18 hackathons in the past 5 months. I'm also the director for UCI's Design-a-thon, which is again kind of like a hackathon for design. And my specialty is in UI UX design as well as product design, product management, and just anything about like product pitch and design. I'll also be mentoring. So if you guys have any questions, we do have 2 award categories. One of them is best product pitch, and the other one is best UI UX design. So if any of you guys are interested in applying for those, I will be mentoring as well. So you can just hit me up if you have any questions. I'm not going to go over the agenda, but this is kind of like a basic overview. But I want to begin by kind of asking or addressing the question of why is design important? Because a lot of you guys came to a hackathon, you're expecting, oh, you should be programming or doing, you should be hacking, but why is design important, right? And actually something that is kind of overlooked a lot is the fact that design is kind of like a conduit for communicating your code. So a lot of times, if you just have like a straight code base, it's really hard to communicate. But when you have really nice design, really nice user experience, it makes it a lot easier to communicate your idea and really highlight your code. So that's like the main thing of why design is so important. You see like this meme, you can see this cup has really nice aesthetics, but it's really hard to use. So it's hard to communicate that your code or that product idea or the vision that you're trying to sell. So this is kind of like my core learning from all the hackathons I've done, is that design is kind of undervalued, even though it's one of the foundations for a really successful hackathon project. And so what I really want you guys to take away from this demonstration or this presentation is kind of understanding where design fits inside of the general scheme of hackathons, and how design is actually one of like the foundations, not only for like a lot of like the hackathons I've done and a major reason why I think we won, but also just like a really important thing in terms of pitching and communicating your idea. So one really common misconception that I see in a lot of hackathons and with a lot of like people in the tech community is equating design with art. And so design is kind of different from art because art is kind of abstract where there isn't really a science to it. And usually you can communicate a really compelling idea just by having a really visually appealing palette. But for design, it's a lot more of a science, and there's a lot more of a foundation in like research and quantitative statistics, and it's just a lot more like geared towards understanding like the scientific foundations for why a user does something, and that's what makes design really amazing and something that's really important for a hackathon project, because it helps you communicate scientifically your idea in a compelling way. So kind of reiterating why good design is so crucial to your hackathon project. It helps communicate your idea. It makes your project stand out. It creates a compelling pitch, and it makes your project really easy to navigate. But the most important part is that good design makes your product automatically understandable. A lot of times you might have a product or you have a project. It's usually really hard to communicate your idea because you just have the code. And a lot of times you're pitching to students, you're pitching to people that aren't necessarily senior engineers. So they're not going to really understand really technically in depth ideas. And especially for hackathons, the main idea is selling a really compelling vision and how you can deliver impact with your product. So that's why it's so important to have really good user experience, make it super easy to navigate your product, make something that's aesthetically pleasing, because it helps make your product automatically understandable. So again, kind of like re-emphasizing what all of this means, it really boils down to this idea of communication, is that you don't just want to talk to engineers about your ideas. You want to be able to communicate this with regular people. Again, a lot of your audience is not going to be like super highly senior engineers. It's going to be regular people. And you really want to be able to sell your product in a way that layman people who have no understanding of technology can understand. So think about how you communicate this to a second grader. Think about how you communicate this to your grandma. That's how you want to sell your product. And this is especially important, especially if you guys are pitching, and even if you guys aren't applying for the Best Pitch Award. You guys are all going to be, demoing your product in the expo hall. And so this is something really important to keep in mind, is that you want a straightforward communication, and it's really going to help just to talk to regular people about your ideas. And so enough about kind of introducing, why design is important. I'm going to introduce you guys to what even is UI UX design for those of you who don't know what it is. So a way that I like to think about design is, first of all, I'm going to introduce user experience, which is kind of like the foundation of design. And user experience is sometimes contradictory because it's really about how an application feels. So you want to make your application as simple and easy to navigate as possible. And sometimes this can even be contradictory. So you see in this picture, there's a very nicely paved road, and you can kind of think about this like the main user interface. So what a user would see, so like the buttons, the cards, things like that. But sometimes a user would cross like a different path, right? So you see here, it's kind of contradictory. They're not actually following the road that you give them. They're actually going to a different road. So the entire idea here is that sometimes design or user experience can be contradictory, but the goal is to make the user's process as seamless as possible. So it's not necessarily forcing them to follow like your straight path, but instead, it's kind of this idea of how you can direct them to the path of least resistance. So how can you make it as easy as possible for them to navigate and use your website? And then the next idea is user interface. So this is probably something that you guys are more familiar with. So this is kind of like aesthetics, taste, and interaction of your product. So this is more commonly, like the artsy, how the thing looks and how not so much how it feels, but it's like, applications like Duolingo having like a gamified look, maybe having like a cuter look or more minimalist or more like, like a SaaS kind of like startup feel. Those are all things that go into this idea of user interface, which is the main screen that your user is going to interact with. And a way that I like to think about it, if any of you guys are history nerds, the aestheticism movement, which was headed by people like Oscar Wilde, and it really focused on just having pure beauty and focusing on the aesthetics and the taste of how art and other things look. So that's kind of the idea of user interface. And so channeling back to, so I talked about these two concepts, user interface and user experience. And really, I want to go back to this idea of, design isn't just about how something looks and how something feels. So it's not just about user interface and user experience. It's really about how something works. So this is a very popular quote from Steve Jobs, but essentially the idea is going back to this concept that design is a science. It's not so much just like an art of how something looks, but there's actually like an integral like statistic measure for how well your design works. So that's kind of how, the coding and the design kind of blend together, is that they both focus on how something works and the functionality, which is the foundation of what design is. So why is this important for you, right? So the kind of traditional user interface that you guys are all familiar with is kind of like a phone screen, right? You might go to an app, or you might go to like a website and just see like a static user interface, and you just navigate through like Amazon or Target. But actually I want to show you guys that there's a lot of different ways that a user can interact with your product. So the reason why this is so important is that a lot of the technology is gearing towards more hands-off, more like VR, gesture control, things that are more accessible and not necessarily just a static screen. And so I want you guys to think about, maybe more novel ways to approach the interface that users interact with. It doesn't just have to be a static website. It could also be VR, could be like gesture control, just really think about how you want your user to interact with your product, and think about novel ways to do this. It doesn't just have to be a static interface. And so I kind of went over like the basics of what user interface and user experience is, but now I'm going to give you guys a more step-by-step guide to how you can actually leverage this in your own hackathon project. So this is more of like the process of how you would design a meaningful product, and I'm going to give you guys kind of the way that I approach most of my hackathons and how I kind of boil down the design process, so you guys aren't doing a bunch of user research and things that are unnecessary and also really difficult to do in like 24 hours. So I want to first introduce you guys to this concept called user-centered design. And this is kind of going to be the main thing I'm going to emphasize throughout the rest of this presentation. But essentially, the idea here is that you're solving problems through user-driven rather than functionality-driven design. A lot of times in hackathons, we want to focus on, oh, what is the coolest tech? What is like, the most functionally impressive product? But really what's most important is how you can deliver impact to your user. So things to think about is like how you can make your product intuitive, simple, yet beautiful. And so these are all things that go into kind of putting the user first and having a very user-driven design process. And so if you don't really understand what this means yet, I will show you like a bunch of like ideas, and you'll kind of understand the concept as you go through it. So before I begin, I know a lot of you guys are probably brainstorming, thinking about, oh, like what kind of project do I even do? Or even, you probably do have a idea, but you're thinking, oh, is this actually a good idea? So I want to introduce you guys to a couple of frameworks that I use to really boil down what is a compelling idea that I want to sell to judges. So one way that I like to start is I begin with my personal problems, build with common sense. And a lot of times, we want to build some really compelling product solving a really compelling use case, but a lot of the times it's something that's super simple and almost common sense. So something like, some of you experience in a lecture hall, you might have difficulty studying and you're like, oh, what if I build, like a flashcard system where I could just transfer all of my lecture notes into flashcards. That's actually what we did for VenusHacks, and we landed second place for that. So a lot of times, you want to just build things that can be easily understood, and you want something that can allow your audience to understand your product at a first glance. So you don't necessarily need to think about really, really big use cases. Just think about, what do you personally experience? What are problems you experience? And then use that to build a compelling product. And so I want to show you guys some examples in the real world that actually demonstrate this idea of just using common sense or making something just 1% better instead of trying to transform the paradigm. So Uber and Anthropic, I'm sure you guys are familiar with these platforms. Uber didn't really change the paradigm of how taxis work. They just changed the way that people would interact with taxis. Instead of having to, go outside and find a random taxi driver, you can go on an app whenever you want to and then find one automatically. Anthropic, they didn't necessarily completely break away from the OpenAI paradigm because they actually, they were a company, someone was in OpenAI, and then they broke off and built their own company. But everything is relatively the same, but they just focus on this 1% difference, which is to focus on the human aspect of AI. And so, these are really great examples of really successful products that have just utilized this idea of common sense and just making a product 1% better instead of changing an entire paradigm. But you can also just build something interesting or something that you find really cool. And one of the projects that I did for Fully Hacks, which is the CSU Fullerton Hackathon, is that we built a VR controlled rover. So it wasn't really, it didn't have a use case, but it was something really interesting. It had a very compelling, a very compelling technical aspect to it. And sometimes you might just want to go into hackathon, build something interesting. You might not necessarily want to build for a use case or build for impact, and that's totally okay. Sometimes the best ideas come from unexpected places, and really the core is just being open to new ideas. If your team member, brings up something that you think is stupid, it might not be stupid because, one example is Who Hacks winner from Rice University. I think this is like a Pokemon like AR app, and it really doesn't have a use case, but it was a very interesting, funny idea, and they won first place. So, just build what you think is interesting, build what you think is fun, and that might bring you to really cool places. And now I'm going to show you guys like the framework that I use when I approach any hackathon project. So number one, I begin with defining a meaningful problem space. So this is one of the problem statements that I used for one of the hackathons. But one really important thing is that you want to really solidify exactly who your target audience is, what kind of meaningful problem do you want to solve, and prioritize potential for impact. So something that's really helpful is when you think about your own pain points or something that you experience, find common patterns across your friends or like family members, especially if you're building in, say, like the ed tech space, or you're building like products for students. It's really easy just to talk to any of your fellow hackers, ask them for their advice, ask them for their opinion on a certain topic, and then just find common patterns across pain points. The key here is that you don't want to build from a solution, but rather you want to build from a problem or a pain point or frustration that people experience. So instead of defining the solution, you want to begin by defining a very concrete problem. And then second is diverge, then converge. So this part is all about brainstorming. The first part is I want to reemphasize this point is that in a hackathon, what's really important is that you're selling a complete project and not necessarily just an idea. A complete project is gonna make your entire product compelling. And so what I want to emphasize is, you don't want to always input every single feature that you think of, but you want to follow these two steps, which is first, you want to diverge, which is you want to, collect your team members, go to the whiteboard and just think, what are ideas, throw everything at me, don't ask any questions, just put it there. And then, after that stage, you can then converge. And this is the most important part, which is you want to prioritize what's important to sell your idea. Now that you've collected all your team members, you've debated on, what kind of things might be important for your product. This is a point where you really want to identify, based on your problem, what are the most important features that are going to help solve this problem and sell my idea. Something I like to do is I have this kind of template. This is usually for more like UI, UX, product-based hackathons. I would have a prioritization matrix, and I would just say, what are my non-negotiables? What are things I must have in my product? What are nice to haves if I have time and I have the bandwidth to add more? And then what are things that are reach goals, which I would just delete for hackathons, maybe revisit it in like if you're building on your project later on, but these are things I would scrap. So this is a very important process, and I would definitely recommend, if you haven't done this already, I'm assuming a lot of people might be in like the divergent stage, really think about if you have like even 3 to 10 features, I really refine it to what is your one core feature that you're trying to sell, and then work from there. So this is a re-emphasis. You want to begin with your problem space and then kind of diverge into all the possible ways that you can solve the problem, and then converge to a final single solution, or in this case for hackathon, a single feature that you want to emphasize in your pitch in your product. And then after that stage, when you have a really, really solid idea that all your team members are enthusiastic about, step 3 is to actually like put it on paper and visualize what this might look like. So the way I like to think about this process is that you want to be scrappy, communicate your ideas fast, and iterate really quickly. There's really 2 goals when you're transferring your idea onto paper, is that number 1, you want to be really speedy and quick. You want to get to your MVP idea as fast as possible and communicate this idea, communicate your vision to your team as quickly as possible. Because a lot of times if you focus just on one idea and then you draft out like an entire high fidelity mockup, you're going to lose a lot of time figuring out what features you want to prioritize for that final pitch. So these two are some, the most important things that you should prioritize. And then I have an example from J.K. Rowling on her napkin sketches is that the entire Harry Potter series began on a napkin. And so the really important thing is that you don't necessarily want to be like super industry standard and do like, high fidelity, low fidelity. You just want to get your idea out there as fast as possible and communicate it as quickly as possible. So that's, and this is like an idea of, this is what I did for Irvine Hacks. You can see like the buttons are not even aligned. I just randomly threw things together because I wanted to communicate my idea really quickly to my engineers and my teammates. And step 4, I'm going to go through this really quickly, but this is when you actually transfer it to your final design. If you guys don't know Figma, it's totally fine. I actually have a tutorial right here. This is a complete end-to-end tutorial for beginners. It's not a video, it's actually like a full Figma file with all of the hacks and tricks that I wish I had when I began designing. So definitely feel free to check this out. And if you guys have any questions specifically about Figma, feel free to contact me. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out real quickly. But going back to this stage where you're actually transferring your vision onto the high fidelity Figma wireframe, right? So just really quickly, what I like to do is, I'm not gonna throw you guys a bunch of terminology about, hi-fi, lo-fi, whatever. But the thing that I like to do is I like to just skip mid-fi and I jump immediately from the sketches. So essentially what you have here, and I jump immediately into hi-fi, which is exactly where your end product would look. And the reason I do this is because, you don't have time and you probably shouldn't waste a lot of your time doing mid-fi and following the industry standard, because the most important thing is, again, here, communicate your vision quickly so you can get from design to engineering and front end as quickly as possible. So I also skip prototyping unless it's like a UI UX based hackathon, because really like it's probably really intuitive for an engineer if you communicate it properly how things work. And it's another thing I like to do is, some people might look down on this, but I think it's really good to reference other successful designs. So look at Behance, look on Dribble, look at other designs that are similar to yours. So let's say you're doing like an Airbnb kind of application. I would look at applications similar to it and then just kind of reference that design. And then this final point is actually really important because this is how things are built on React. And if you're using like HTML, CSS, this might be a little bit different. But React is built on components, which is essentially like cards, reusable elements, buttons, and things that are reusable and that you can like copy and paste across different files. So if you're a designer, I would recommend begin with components first. So begin with buttons, begin with like you see here, there's like a modal, things like that. You should begin with that because that's how that's like the beginning process of front end and how developers would begin developing. And then this is the tutorial again. Okay, now I've gone through my entire process of how I usually approach like the ideation to design process. I'm now going to share with you guys some design hacks that I personally use for hackathons. And so these are kind of like the tricks and hacks that helped really speed up my design. And also there's one trick that has consistently been super useful across everyone that I've talked with. So stay tuned for that, but it's a trick about spacing, which is really interesting. But first of all, I want to begin with this first hack, which is use a visual hierarchy to highlight information. So a lot of the times you might have a lot of information on your interface, and it makes it really confusing and it's hard to communicate your idea. But when you're designing, you really want to think about what kind of things do you want to emphasize in your product? What is going to contribute to your final product vision in a solution you're trying to deliver to your users? So a really easy example of Google is their entire product is based on searching. So obviously their entire visual hierarchy boils down to the search engine. So you want to think about what is the core functionality, what's a core interaction I want my user to take, and then really highlight that in your design. And again, this helps you draw attention to the right elements to tell a story, and also makes it a lot easier for people and users to parse your interface. And a second hack is the one hack that a lot of people have said has been extremely useful for both developers and designers, and this is something called the friendship rule of spacing. This also applies to anything that requires like pixel or sizing, so also like font sizing, sizing of cards and containers. But this rule is essentially also called the 4 to 8 pixel rule, which essentially means that you space everything by 4 to 8 pixel increments. So 16 pixels, 8 pixels, 32 pixels, et cetera, instead of kind of estimating, oh, like 37 pixel spacing or like 2 pixel spacing. This gives a more scientific way to space out your elements. And a more important part about this is a hierarchy of how they space elements. If you see in this visual example, which will make it, make more sense, is essentially you want to group things by how related they are to each other. So the way that spacing works is that you want to increase the spacing as elements grow less related to each other. So just to give you guys an example, if you have something like I love cats as a title, and then you have like a paragraph explaining why I love cats, obviously these two things can't exist in isolation. You can't just, block out this entire paragraph and then you just say I love cats, and you're like, wait, why does this person love cats, right? So these are what we would call best friends. And these would be the closest spaced together. So this would be something like 4 pixel or 8 pixel spacing. So between these two elements, it would be like, either 4 or 8 pixel spacing. And essentially the reason for that is because these two elements need each other in order to exist or make sense. But then I'm going to go to the other side of spectrum, which is what we call neighbors or strangers. And these are essentially elements that don't need each other to exist. So let's say I have a card here explaining why I love cats. And let's say I have a card here that says why I love dogs. You don't necessarily need those two cards to exist, right? Because you can have both of them in isolation and both of them would still make sense in isolation. So what we would do is that for these two cards, we would have a much larger spacing. So let's say 32 pixels, 16 pixels, or something like that. And just kind of to reiterate this entire idea, TLDR is that when elements are more related to each other or need each other to exist, you would have like smaller spacing, so smaller pixel distance. And then when you have elements that don't need each other to exist, so let's say you have different sections or you have different cards, then you would increase the spacing between those elements. And the reason I mention this is that spacing is probably one of the most important things to make your interface easy to interact with. And again, this is a core judging rubric or judging point, right? Is that you want a really easy to navigate user interface. And so spacing, if you get this correct, you can like probably ignore the branding and other things because this is like one of the most important things that's going to make your website really easy to parse and navigate through. And of course, this only applies if you're building web app interfaces. And again, main idea is that you want to give your elements breathing space. Negative space increases ease of scannability and also increases accessibility of your platform, makes the user experience much more easy and seamless. And that's also a big rubric point if you guys are aiming for the top for the prizes. So with that aside, I'm going to introduce you guys to this next hack 3, which is more, technical and something that you could really, really easily do because on Figma, on websites, you can search up contrast ratio checker, and you can also search up like text sizing rules or something, and it will show up like an entire like benchmark for what kind of colors go well together. And you can also test out two colors. Let's say you have red, let's say you have black. You can also see between these two colors, do they have a good contrast ratio? And essentially what this is that it's kind of just standardizing things. If you just run your entire website through like this, which this should be a link to like a color contrast ratio checker. Just run your website through it, run two colors through it, and then see if they pass. If they pass, then you're good to go. If not, change it, because this is essentially an accessibility benchmark, which is what's gonna make your application really easy to use. And also, you know, for older people, if you have two colors that are like essentially the same in tone, it's gonna be really hard to navigate and parse through. So that's why this is important. And also it's really, really, really easy to do, and you don't need any skill for this. So I highly recommend doing this. And then last one is creating a compelling brand identity. And so I wanted to add this final thing is because we discussed layout, we discussed spacing, and then we discussed benchmarks, but now this is kind of like a cherry on top. Because if you think about like brands like Supreme, they have a really mediocre design. There's nothing really special about it, but they have a really, really strong brand identity. So something that can actually really propel your project and make it memorable for judges is having a really, really strong brand identity. And you don't have to do, like graphics, like really, really cool logos or whatever. But the main thing is that you want to have a really strong, meaningful, and impact-driven brand. So have a really meaningful problem statement, a really meaningful product, and then make it consistent throughout your entire product, make it bold, attach that statement to every part of your project. And this could actually make up for a lot of like mediocre design. And this doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow these other steps, which is like having good spacing, having good visual hierarchy, and then doing the benchmark. But what this means is that you don't have to have really flashy graphics or really, really like aesthetically pleasing user interfaces. But if you have a really compelling brand, this can really drive like a lot of the success points for your product. So this is something that I would definitely keep in mind, especially if you're not too familiar with the design part. And then this is like a framework I usually use for every hackathon. It just keeps things consistent. I have my colors, I have fonts, I have the logo, I have some components, have the color palette, really simple. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of times, we might spend a lot of time trying to lay out what this might look like, but I have it here for you. So if you just want to reference it, it's totally fine. Just see what you can do, but really good to have a framework so you can focus on developing a really compelling idea instead of like the technical parts. So final thing, something to remember is that a focused, simple idea is more impactful than a multi-dimensional complex one. So the idea here is we have 10 different features right now. I would narrow it down to one single feature, just one single thing that's gonna sell your core vision and also solve the core problem that you're selling to the audience, right? And the final, like, what this all boils down to is that a finished product is better than trying to implement all those features and trying to sell an idea without like any finished like product or project to sell. So it's also, if you guys went to like the hackathon workshop we did yesterday, that's also something that we emphasized. A finished product is a lot better than just trying to sell an idea. So with that said, that's pretty much it for the workshop, but we also have a best UI UX design award. So where I think we're gonna share with you all the slides. I also have a template that I usually use for hackathons for planning like the pitch, for planning the design, for planning the product. So I will most likely share with you guys that template later on. But yeah, we do have a best UI UX design award. So if you guys are interested in this, definitely sign up. If you guys want more info about this, you can also contact me or Ryan or anyone else on the design board who is judging. But yeah, thank you for coming. Good luck with hacking. Again, I'll also be mentoring. So I'm mainly going to focus on like design, Figma, product pitch, and front end. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to ask. This is my LinkedIn and Discord. So you want to scan that. I'm also free on LinkedIn. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Do you guys wanna? Oh, QR code? Okay. Okay.
The QR code will start showing work now, so we'll give like a few.
For you.
Really edit with it.
Yeah, also, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll be here after.